Okay, I'd like to say a few words about Dr. Yuri Verkoshansky, and my relationship to and with him. I've known Yuri I've known of him since the early 1960s, and I didn't meet him in person until the 1980s. So I have a long history with him. And my initial contact was with some of the articles that he wrote and that I translated. He was one of the outstanding Russian scientists, and there were quite a few at that time. He was just one of many. This is not to put him down in any way, because he did a few things and he created a few things that really revolutionized the whole way of training. His stretch shortening concept that is now applied all over the place in many different exercises, as well as his introduction of plyometrics. But I'll talk about plyometrics separately in a different podcast, because it's a kind of a complex issue. But he doesn't like to have it called plyometrics. It should be the shock method. So we see a distinct difference here that I'll explain in another podcast. But anyway, when I was reading the Russian literature, I saw articles by Yuri, and I was kind of impressed with some of these articles. They were different. And one of the first ones that I remember translating had to do with long jumps and short jumps. See, and this was a concept I never heard of, long jumps and short jumps. Well, the short really meant short distance that were more explosive in nature, and longer ones that were more for strength endurance. So the jumps, he differentiated the different types of jumps and the training that they produce. And then, as I got to know him and being in the Soviet Union, I picked up a few books, a couple of which were by Yuri, and especially his book on specialized strength training, which today you can get most of in his latest book that just came out. You can find it on our website, Specialized Strength Training, the Coach's Manual. So you'll see it on that site. Excellent book with great information. And here again, the information we can say is old in comparison to the information that has been available from the Soviet Union, but it's brand new to the United States. This is information that has never before been reported. Oh, we've had little tidbits here and there. We've had some people do takeoffs on the Russian system, but none of them really look at the total Russian system and what it does. See, and from my exposure to and acquaintance with Yuri, I got to know him quite a bit when I was the first one taking a group of strength coaches over to the Soviet Union through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So I made contact with the Russians in Moscow to determine who we wanted as our speakers. And Verkoshansky was one of the first ones that I wanted, mainly because of the materials that I had been reading by him. And after meeting him, then we got more involved with the plyometrics, and then I started talking more about him here and did more of his work, translated more of his works, and we maintained a good relationship ever since that time. And we even tried bringing him over to the United States, but because of health reasons he was unable to do this. But through correspondence we were still able to bring in quite a bit of his information. So he was probably one of the more outstanding Russian scientists, but yet still a coach. This was the beauty of the Russian system. They had some of the most brilliant people in the world, and yet they still worked with athletes. So they didn't just come up with some of these concepts. They looked at the concepts and then they applied them to the athletes. And they had access to the world's best athletes, some of the world's best athletes. So these were methods for the high-level performer. And here again, their main purpose was to determine how they can improve athletic performance. They wanted to beat us very badly. They did to a good extent, but not completely. So they were always frustrated that they weren't even more successful. So they had many scientists working, developing new theories and concepts and training practices. Many of our training practices today come from the Russians. It's hard to think of any concept that we have originated in this country. Almost all of them have been copied and imitated from what the Russians have been doing. See, and some of this started when I started talking more about Verkoshansky and introducing him to the United States. I did this with Fred Wilt, who coined the term plyometrics. See, then you knew were Fred Wilt and myself, and we were responsible for really getting the word out on this whole concept of plyometrics, as well as what Verkoshansky was doing. So even today, we use many of his concepts that he's well known for, especially the stretch shorten concept and plyometrics. And we'll take a look at more information by him in future podcasts.